So welcome back and welcome to people who are here for the first time. My name's Sherry Meredith. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of HTEL, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning. We'd like to begin, as we always do, with reading our land acknowledgement and how we as an organization try to honor this privilege. So in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, Hamilton ThirdAge Learning acknowledges that the lands from which we deliver our lectures are located on the customary and traditional lands of the Indigenous people of this territory. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. As an organization, we commit ourselves to fostering a culture of learning, consideration, collaboration, and reconciliation in the programs that we provide, as well as how we operate and interact with our community. So welcome to this morning. We're all excited to hear the second talk of our series. I wanted to mention, as the signs out front indicated, we are taking some photos today. And it's nothing elaborate, but when we look back over our 14-year history, we own one photo. So we thought it was timely. So please, though, if you have any concerns about that, if you could speak to me, I'll be at the back after the lecture. But we're just trying to capture the range of things and the people that make this happen. And they would be used probably for our own promotions, perhaps on our website, perhaps in our promotional materials. But we just felt that it was really important to capture also the story and history of HTEL in photos. So it's my pleasure now to introduce a member of our program committee, Bob Morrow, who is going to introduce this morning's speaker.
Thank you and good morning. Dr. Mike Dixon is Professor Emeritus and Director of the Controlled Environment Systems Research Facility at the University of Guelph, where he has spent the bulk of his career as a scientist, researcher, and educator. His research areas are wide and varied. Some examples include ozone technologies related to the disinfection of food processing equipment and grocery store products. Indoor air quality, especially as related to this life support systems. Robotic harvesting, atmosphere management, humidity and gas composition in fully enclosed systems like the International Space Station, and the development of a similar venue for the surface of the Moon and Mars. Mars is a very harsh environment. We in Canada are very familiar with harsh environments. Like parking this morning. Mike's work in the Arctic has not only benefited Canadian agriculture, but will also have applications in human space exploration. Mike has worked with the Canadian Space Agency and NASA, and was the principal investigator for the Tomatosphere project, which looked at the viability of tomatoes, which Mike won't even touch, by the way, as a candidate crop for Mars. The project also reached out to students in Canadian classrooms. Students germinated the seeds in a blind study, which had been sent to the ISS, the International Space Station, and tortured, and compared their germination rates with a control group. The project has reached more than 3 million students, some of whom might met today, mostly in Canada, over the past 20 years. If you don't know about the Tomatosphere project, it's a very significant one, and it received the Alouette Award early in the 20th century, 2007, I think it was, and the previous winner was the Canadarm2, and that's for Canada's most prestigious invention in the aerospace area. Mike's PhD is from the University of Edinburgh, and his association with Scotland has had lasting effects. He has a wonderful collection of single malt scotches. But his is a different perspective on Scotch, much different from mine, which focuses on taste. He has that innate ability to identify a Scotch through its nose and the taste. But the real asset, he knows the location, background, and history of the distilleries. His scotches in his house are organized by geographic area. I don't think he's an agri-food scientist. I think he's a closet geographer, actually. It's that added dimension that separates him from the rest of us who are just there for the immediate effects of an excellent Macallan or even a Glen turret. And Mike has just started a new project which involves barley. Barley seeds were taken to the International Space Station, returned to Earth, and shipped to Scotland for planting and germination with eventual culmination into Scotch. It's not been missed on me that he got into this area right after my retirement from the project. With the recent successes of Artemis II and our Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen on board, the topic of space exploration, a source of technology transfer in Canadian agri-food sectors, seems most appropriate. Please welcome our special guest today, Dr. Michael Dixon.
I assume that, yeah, this works. Thanks, Bob. I've known Bob for a long time, as I suspect many of you have as well. I was asking him when I arrived and we were sort of chatting up at the front, I said, what the heck is a ThirdAge learning group? I'd never heard of that before. I said, what's the first? And what's... So he explained it all to me. And now that I see looking out at a sea of gray hair, I now know exactly. And I guess I'm part of you. So I'm notoriously, I have an obscure off switch. So Bob has the hook, and when we start running out of time, he'll exercise that. So pay attention. Everyone who didn't see The Martian, the movie? I can't tell, but some of you didn't see it. Good heavens. Okay, of all of the science fiction movies out there, The Martian is probably the most scientifically correct, sort of. It's got a few glitches in it, but you got to allow Hollywood a bit. But it focuses on where this picture here, and I don't have a pointer, but the lower one where Matt Damon is trying to figure out how long the potatoes he's growing are going to keep him alive. That's what we do at Guelph. We try and standardize the profile of nutritional compounds in all of the 35 or 40 candidate crop species that you're going to take into space for your vegetarian lifestyle. And if that's predictable, standardized, then you know how long you're going to live. So food determines how far from Earth we can go and how long we can stay. It's really so fundamental. And there are some really, tangible and extremely important technical things that you have to figure out, like pressure and atmosphere composition and things like that. And that's what we do in Guelph, advancing the technology incrementally. We're not going to get there all of a sudden. And certainly when we go to Mars, not if, but when we go to Mars, we'll be sending out big containers of groceries ahead of time, robotically landing them and storing them for the first crews that go up. But eventually, because Mars is, it's roughly a 1,000-day round trip, because as you know, when you leave Earth to go to Mars, it's every 26 months that we line up. And by the time you get to Mars in the first trip, 6 to 8 months, typically with current propulsion systems, the Earth is gone. It's on the other side of the sun, so you got to wait, and that can be a bit challenging. So eventually, if we're going to have long-term exploration, and we'll find the fossils of some microbial life there, you heard it here first. There has been, maybe not now, but there has been life on Mars, and we'll definitely find it in the bottom of a frozen lake or something. So remember that. If we're going to have long-term exploration with lots of people, you can't rely on shipping food from Earth. The mass and energy cost is just too high, and so we must come up with bioregenerative, self-sustaining, indefinite life support. And that's the subject of our research activity at Guelph. Go. Nikki, I might need your help on this one. There we go. So we don't need that more introduction. I put in red ink here some of the things that we'll talk about, not all of them, but mass and energy. That's the currency of space travel. You spend the money in the Canadian economy. So it's a very fundamental issue that we have to deal with. But everything that we do in the space exploration agenda is trying to reduce the mass and reduce the energy requirement of everything we do. Plus, when you go to space, no garbage. You can't throw anything away. You must recycle all the carbon, oxygen, water, nitrogen. Everything has to go around in a circle. The challenge that we have, we're not very good at it here on Earth yet. The challenge that we have is when you get it in such a small volume, such as a space exploration habitat on the Moon or Mars, the capacitance is inadequate. Oxygen goes around at a certain pace, carbon goes around at a different pace, water goes around pretty quickly, nitrogen less quickly, you have to compost and things. So it's a challenge to marry all of these time constants for the recycling of all the stuff that you need for life support. And we're nowhere near there yet. So initially, the Moon will be where we break stuff, because in a hurry, you can get to the Moon in 3 days. And so it's relatively safe in terms of test driving a lot of the technologies that we'll deploy, but there are still issues, and we'll learn them as we go here. Now, candidate crop selection. Bob mentioned barley. Back in 1995, I was appointed to one of these, this international committee called the International Candidate Crop Selection Committee. It was a group of guys like me, scientists and space researchers from NASA and elsewhere, ESA, and we met at Kennedy Space Center in 1995, the first time I went. And the objective then is to pick and choose among the list of candidate crops. And they're nothing special, they're just what you would expect to be part of a nutritious, psychologically appealing, well-balanced vegetarian diet. So, peas, beans, carrots, the usual suspects. And I went there armed with my 2 offerings from the journeyman Canadian delegate, roses and barley. And my rationale for roses was the psychological benefit that you could be gained from, imagine that first dozen roses from the Moon. However, the mass and energy cost of growing a plant that you can't eat doesn't work. Food drives the equation. If you can grow enough food for all of us, then the oxygen and the CO2 scrubbing and the water recycling are all almost double. So we've got lots of room to push the mass and energy cost of the food production down in the research agenda, and we've done just that. But so roses scrubbed off the list, unfortunately. They'll be back. And I was being sponsored at the time in my controlled environment work by the Ontario Rose Growers. Okay, shameless, but there are no more Ontario Rose Growers. There doesn't exist anymore. But in any case, barley. So my rationale for barley was pretty straightforward, and I used the wrong rationale, but my rationale was us humans in all of our history, recorded or otherwise, have always, regardless of culture, geography, whatever, have always made alcohol. And I was determined it was going to be the good stuff. So the chair of the committee was a very eminent plant physiologist, Frank Salisbury, who's not that long ago passed away, but he was growing wheat on Space Station Mir with the Russians. He's been in the business for a long time. He didn't even laugh. And I came to realize too late, Frank was a teetotal Mormon from Utah, and hence the lack of any levity in his assessment of barley. So barley was off the list. I couldn't believe it. Frank eventually retired. He was replaced by my close friend and head of the life sciences program at Kennedy Space Center, Dr. Ray Wheeler, himself a very eminent plant scientists, especially in the space exploration community. So over dinner at his place one night, Ray and I colluded, and barley is now officially on the candidate crop committee, candidate crop selection for human space exploration going forward. It didn't stop there. Some years later, I was at a conference in Arizona, out in this geodesic dome theater stuck in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And I told that anecdote just like that. Frank and his wife were in the front row, just like that. And once again, the old bugger didn't laugh. His wife, Mary, though, who I became pretty close friends with, just about fell off her chair. And we all was good in the end, but Frank still never got it. However, as I say, barley is officially on the human space exploration life support agenda. We'll get into a couple of those other things. Here's a sampling of our growth chambers that we've developed. The top corner, that is 1995. That's the beginning of, in the space program, you have to have a sexy acronym or you're nothing. So ours was SALSA, Space Advanced Life Support Agriculture. We're at Guelph, so agriculture had to be there. But SALSA is ours, and that was our first collection of chambers, those two. And these chambers all have one thing in common, and that is they are completely sealed when you put the plants in there and the water and the nutrients and shut the door, and everything goes around in a circle. Nothing escapes. They're completely sealed. And this makes them a very unique research venue for looking at plant-environment interaction. And back in those days, in the 90s and early 2000s, we were seeking that objective of standardizing the profile of nutritional compounds so that when Matt does his arithmetic, he can calculate exactly how long he's going to live if he grows these plants with this environment control recipe. And that's the key. You need that recipe of light, quality, and quantity, CO2, temperature, humidity, nutrients, water, and we added pressure. He wanted to know how low can you take the pressure and mix up the atmosphere composition and still have plants providing the functions of human life support. And the pressure issue we addressed in that chamber in the lower left corner there, hypobaric chamber. We have 5 of those, and we had a bunch of smaller ones, but all these chambers have the same characteristic. They have that really high fidelity environment control and computer automated sensing systems that every second collect data from the atmosphere, measuring mostly photosynthetic gases, oxygen, CO2, and water vapor. And if you measure those 3 things as you manipulate the environment cocktail around these plants very precisely, plant can't hide. So you have very discreetly and tightly nailed down plant-environment interaction, and that's the key to success here. And here's Carol Weekamp. She was my grad student and published her thesis in 2005. And the question she was asking was, how low can you take the pressure? Because then the lower you can take the pressure, you could consider a low mass inflatable system. If you need full Earth atmosphere, the chamber she's working with here has 1.5 square meters of plant growing area. Each of us, back at around that time, each of us needed 73.2 square meters of plant area for the food. We've since driven that down. It's down now less than half of that. It's around 35 or so, depending on how you calculate it and what plants you're growing, but around 35 square meters. Still, lots of area. This has 1.5 square meters. The chamber weighs 8 tons. It's capable of sustaining a vacuum with full Earth atmosphere outside. Of course, we're going to have the reverse on the Moon and Mars, and 8 tons is not going to work. So if the answer to Kara's question was you need full Earth atmosphere, 100 kilopascals roughly, 21 oxygen, et cetera, you know what the atmosphere there's going to be a quiz, by the way. So if that was the answer, human space exploration, as we can currently consider it, is done. We cannot possibly, might be able to sort of kind of have a small place on the Moon that's full Earth atmosphere and do some stuff. Not on Mars, not going to happen. So we'd be done until we come up with materials that are low enough in mass and tough enough to hold full Earth atmosphere under those conditions. So luckily, watch the pressure gauge up in the upper left corner, and there should be some sound, but we don't get the sound. That's okay. It's under. Okay, we don't need the sound. So the pressure gauge is going down, down, down. It spends about 3 hours, that's hours and minutes up there, and it's now at 70% of Earth's atmosphere. And these are pepper plants. It'll now bounce to 40% of Earth's atmosphere, spend 3 hours there, and then drop down. You see the plants are kind of, okay, they're not that happy, but they're not bad. And then it'll drop to 10% of Earth's atmospheric pressure. And that's 10% of everything. And here we are at 10. And again, we spent 3 hours under these conditions. And as you can see, this is different. Now, this is not exactly a disaster yet. At 10 hours, bang, we're back to full Earth atmosphere. And look, it's a resurrection. So this is actually a picture of our technical failure in the very early stages of our work in the hypobaric chambers. Basically what happened was, anybody ever see the original Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger? You know, when he falls out of in an audience like this, you all know that stuff. So he falls out of the Mars habitat, and what happened? He started to explode, right? Because his internal pressure is higher than the almost vacuum of Mars. These plants now going down to 1/10 of Earth's atmosphere, which is kind of a low pressure. And what are they doing? They're wilting. And that's because our condenser was sucking water out of the air faster than the plants could put it back in, so they had water stress. Their pressure, internal pressure, actually went down even lower. So we said, we can fix that. And then we did, of course, because Kara's answer was she can have plants growing all the way down to 1/10 of Earth's atmosphere. And here's the testing. Those plants up at the top are sort of full Earth atmosphere with 1/3 of the oxygen we're enjoying here today. And then we kept it at 1/3, all the way down to 1/10 of Earth's atmosphere. But 70% of it is oxygen. Now, I never say that in front of a fire marshal, or we'd be shut down. So, however, the plants at 1/10 of Earth's atmosphere, as long as 70% of its oxygen, 7 kilopascals of oxygen partial pressure, 1.2 of water vapor, and about 0.1 of oxygen, then a little bit of nitrogen or argon as a buffer gas. So, that's a full order of magnitude range of adaptability that most plants have for pressure. So, thankfully, human space exploration can continue. It was literally that big a deal breaker of a question 25 years ago. Now, we've gone to harsh environments. Here's a greenhouse that some of my grad students built. Actually, Tom Graham, who now has my job, built on Devon Island. Devon Island is the largest uninhabited island in the world. It's up in the high Arctic. And there are rules of engagement when you go there. It's governed by the Inuit. And this is the only relatively permanent structure on that whole island. We had a few, the research season was July. And even then it was pretty bad. But basically, we spent quite a bit of time. Our objectives here were remote control and automation. Not productivity or any of that sort of thing. We needed some remote control. We were basically simulating a lunar or Martian habitat, and can we control, can we get the food to grow and be there and be available when the crew arrives, and that was our objective. It took us 4 years to grow the first head of lettuce reliably. So it's not a trivial exercise. I know one of the big challenges right at the beginning was we were using a satellite that's located pretty much overhead here, a geosynchronous satellite that's up here over the dense population of northeastern North America, and we were communicating with Devon Island way the hell up here. So instead of just doing this, so we would send a signal to turn the irrigation on or whatever, start the heat going with the propane tanks and get the energy from the solar panels, and the signal would go, but it wouldn't get back, and it took us forever. We lost a whole season that year because we couldn't communicate with our greenhouse. 4 lines of code in the computer slowed it down. So because basically the computer was expecting a response at the time of, as if you're in Toronto or New York City and the geosynchronous is right above you, but trying to get the signal back from Devon Island was a challenge. 4 lines of code and it was solved, but it still took us 4 years to grow lettuce. And we had one major challenge there. The only other life form of any significance on Devon Island is polar bears. And they're very curious. They smashed into the greenhouse and ate some rock wool and realized that's not food, so they left. But they made a mess of everything. And we noticed that on there. We had cameras that, we'd check sort of daily cameras shots. And here's Tom and two of my grad students at the time. So this was back in 2002 when we built this thing, and we ran it for 11 years with the Canadian Space Agency and some interactions with NASA. We're also in the south. So here we are in the Antarctic. This is a European Union project that was led by the German Space Agency, good friends of ours now. We have another contract with them that we just signed. And we built this system called Eden ISS. There's too much information on the web if you're silly enough to Google that. But basically, I think I have some pictures here. Here's it being unloaded. It takes a long time and it costs a lot to get stuff to the Antarctic and set it up in relation to that big box there is the Neumayer 3, the German research station operated, and our little Eden project, they wanted us initially to be at least 1 kilometer away, so that we wouldn't mess up their snow deposition experiments around the legs of their chamber, of their box. We finally convinced them that half a kilometer should be close enough. And you still had to have a safety line connecting, because if you stepped out in a snowstorm and you didn't have a safety line between those two places, you would never see you again. So we grew, I think, a dozen different a dozen, should I be aiming it somewhere? It'll come eventually, I'm really confident. So there we go. So here's a sampling of some of the stuff we grew, and here's our good friend Zach. We left him down there for a year. He didn't actually select that mission on his own. We helped him quite a bit. We made it sound a lot more glamorous than it eventually was. However, the one thing, the tragedy about that whole experiment was it was a 4-year-long project. It had, there was 100 scientists involved. We would meet in Bremen, Germany annually and go over the objectives and the milestones and figure out the budget, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the 3rd year when we all met, somebody noticed that the budget omitted the line item of extracting our hardware and bringing it back to Germany. Not trivial. That one little item pushed us way over the edge on budget, so we had to leave it there. However, the crew at Neumayer 3, who originally were kind of reluctant to have us involved, it wasn't their idea, so there was some pushback. However, after 3 years of this, fresh veggies and whatnot, which they never see otherwise, they were quite happy to take over and using our standard operating procedures and connected to the communications booth system back in Bremen. They continued to operate it, trained themselves as horticulturists, and lived quite happily. We're also in space. This is the space station, the Canadarm. And on the edge of the out on the bucket head are some canisters. And in collaboration with the Glenlivet Distillery, I sent some of their proprietary barley up to the space station to be situated on what's called the MISSI platform, Materials International Space Station Experiment. So it's a platform that's stuck outside the space station. Is designed to be a place where you test stuff you're going to send into space, like hardware, sensors, computer automated systems, whatever. And we were the second biological payload. The first biological payload on the MISSI platform was actually tomato sphere seeds a couple of years prior. So we were negotiating with NASA and with Alpha Space, the company in Houston that ships stuff up there. We were negotiating with them and getting a price tag on how much the mission was going to cost to send a bag of proprietary barley seeds up there and put them outside for 6 months on the MISSI platform. Now, the platform is literally a platform like this, and it has a fore and an aft and a starboard and port sides. And those are the expensive places for your testing to happen. There are also a couple of cheap seats underneath. So we're dealing with Scotsmen here. We got the cheap seats. And so our barley mission, our payload was underneath the MISSI platform. Now, the space conditions in the vacuum, in the dark, it's about -200 in the shade. So, and we had tested the barley at liquid nitrogen temperatures, and they were fine. They don't mind liquid nitrogen -180. So we were confident that they were going to survive the cold. We were really confident they couldn't possibly survive in the full sun where it goes up to +200. So I figured toasted barley for sure. Well, the seeds came back. Here's just another picture of them on there. The seeds came back, and here they are, the lab control and the ground control. There are two different experiments here, so there are two different controls. One bag of seeds was outside the space station, one bag of seeds was inside. Now, we had 25 years of experience with tomato seeds inside, and we knew that they were fine. I needed to have some barley survive. I did not expect the stuff on the platform to survive. We needed the stuff to survive because the science is one thing, but Glenlivet was interested in the marketing. And they needed some seeds to be able to grow and do their thing. And so we had some inside, and I knew that they would be fine. So we brought the seeds back, sent them back to Scotland. They replicated them up to 5 generations of space heritage seed. And as Bob said, they grew them, harvested them, malted, distilled, and they're in a barrel now, and I'll be taking pictures of it in September. But the flight vacuum, the one on the far left, they're alive. Absolutely phenomenal, blew me away until I looked at the data. Remember, they're on the cheap seats. They're in the shadow of the MISSI platform. Temperatures, we had data all the way through. Temperatures were never got above 50, and plants can typically handle, up to the mid-40s, and it never spent much time above 50. Now, they weren't the toughest looking seedlings and the most vigorous, but they were alive, quite phenomenal. So a neat piece of science. You get this is them up close. So, roughly 60% of them germinated. Phenomenal. So the other thing we're doing now, the subject of this is tech transfer. The Moon and Mars is a really small market for this kind of science and technology development. So really, and we don't do anything at the University of Guelph in this program that doesn't have an industry partner, a sponsor, somebody who puts money and personnel and equipment on the line to leverage federal and provincial funding matches and stuff like that. So, that's how the program has operated over the last 40 years in my career there. And so here we are. This is a vertical farm, sort of a prototype. Not much bigger than me, but basically a 3-level thing. And we were growing the I'm stuck on barley here. We're growing the lettuce with 3 different colors of light. Now, this is a fancy lettuce. It's a designer lettuce, got a red streak of anthocyanin in it. So it's a favorite with chefs. And we grew it under red, white, and blue light for no real reason, just to see what happens here. And this is what you get. The only difference in the environment that grew these 3 different plants is the color of the light. So same light intensity, different spectrum. And the red one is twice the dry biomass of either of the other 2. And of course, I've got a herd of grad students and technicians in the lab, so 15 or 20 people got around, did a blind taste test. And 100% reliability, oh, that's the blue one, that's the red. Now, fair enough. You could tell the blue one because it had a slight texture difference to it. It was a little thicker and a little texture difference. But nevertheless, they tasted different. And Suzuki sent a group over with the Nature of Things, and they heard this story and said, yeah, right. So we grew some lettuce specifically for them, and they filmed it all, of course, and did the taste test and confirmed, yep, indeed, they taste different. And the 100% question is, so which is the best? And the presenter said, well, that's simple. You mix them all together and add ranch dressing. So, and she's right. I preach to my students and classes for forever now, lettuce is not food until you add the ranch dressing. It's marginal nutritional composition. And yet, 98% of the vertical farming industry today around the world grows lettuce. Some salad green or other, microgreens, whatever. There's some of them that have some marginal nutritional composition or nutraceutical benefits and whatnot, but they are not food. They're not going to save us from anything. We need protein, carbs. We need a complex diet that is nutritionally balanced, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't it. So the industry has set itself, even I can grow lettuce, as we see. So the industry has set itself up to do that. It's going to have to change. And the margins, we can grow 3 different kinds of plants in a controlled environment. Food, the lowest possible margin. Ornamentals, 2.5 to 3 times the margin of a food crop. And medicine, 200 to 500 times the margin of a food crop like lettuce or something, even the most sophisticated food crop. Medicinal plants have by far the most, and we're all familiar with this critter. I know everyone here. However, it's different now. When we were kids, and we were getting Mexican weed full of seeds and sticks, and it had about 5% THC in it, this is completely different. These are sensimilia, these are buds up to 30% THC. You can't handle it. Trust me on that. So the 30 years of experience in the program growing food crops for the space exploration agenda to establish a standardized profile of nutritional compounds so that Matt Damon can get his arithmetic right. Now we're just shifting over into the phytopharmaceutical industry sector, plant-made medicine, and exactly the same issue is there. You have to standardize the profile of medicinal compounds, or the plant will never achieve the status of a conventional pharmaceutical commodity, because it's different every time. It depends on the environment, depends on the color of the light, what the secondary metabolites that make up the cannabinoids in this case end up being. And that means that if you're treating childhood epilepsy today or glaucoma tomorrow, it's never going to be the same. And so that's the challenge of the pharmaceutical industry, is to standardize that. And the only way you can do it is with the high fidelity environment control technology that we've developed for space. Now, Tomatosphere is an aged program now. We started in 1999, talking Bob Thirsk and I, and the guy I always forget, from Mark Garneau Collegiate, the director of Mark Garneau Collegiate, and you forget to. That's what happens, Anyway, Bob and I put together, he came to me with the Canola Lab project. Oh, we're actually doing all right here. Bob and I went set this up, and in 2000, Mark Garneau, the top picture in the middle there, his last trip into space, the late Mark Garneau, took our first bag of tomatosphere seeds up into the space station. It went around the Earth, I think, for 7 or 8 days, came back, and we distributed it to classrooms across Canada. The program has since grown out of my control completely. We've licensed it to Let's Talk Science, and Bob mentioned a number of 3 million students. It's actually 6. As of now, 6 million students across Canada and the U.S. have engaged in this, and I met one of them just a little while ago, Charlie, the photographer, and he did Tomatosphere recently. And then, of course, you see the bags get bigger and bigger by the time Chris Hadfield is doing it. And now David Saint-Jacques was the most recent Canadian astronaut to take our seeds up, and he had 2 of those 1.2 million seed bags, and the first one had 250,000 seeds in it. So we've grown beyond our wildest dreams, and that's Bob and I at the launch of Mark's first trip. That would have been in December of 2000. So this is what you have to write down. The technologies that we develop, the horticultural management strategy, the color of the light that yields the standardized profile of nutritional or medicinal compounds, that's the tech transfer that evolves from this program of trying to go to space and survive. It's food, as I said, drives the equation, and I've just, the money is spent in the Canadian economy. We don't send a check up to the moon or Mars. And likewise, I've just noticed, I just heard our Prime Minister recently announce a $1 billion plus contribution to the Ukrainian war effort. He's not going to write a check of your money, give it to Volodymyr Zelensky, and where he'll then buy fighter aircraft from Donald Trump. No. He's going to spend it in the Canadian economy. It is going to be an economic engine for Canada, not anybody else. So, that's how I'm talking to the converted here. I'm absolutely certain you guys understand this economics 101. But basically, if we could imagine if just 50%, I'm being greedy, okay, 10% of that multi-billion-dollar enterprise in war was devoted to space exploration, I'd have my barley on the moon by Christmas, and we'd have food security in the north, our cousins in the north, by Easter next year. So it's not a question of whether we have the technology. Of course we do. We know exactly how to do it and what's involved and what the recipes are and how to test the different elements of the life support research agenda. So we'll just have to get her done. Thank you.
Thank you later on. I think first of all we're going to have some questions. So I will let you start.
Any on this side? Sorry about that.
I'll stay put for our camera guy.
And maybe you answered this question. I've asked it several times to several people, and nobody has been able to give me a response that I understood. How is the work you're doing and the money you're spending helping us all here on Earth?
Well, as you can imagine, I get that a lot. And Canada is a reasonably well-educated, technically competent society. We have the wherewithal to address something as complicated as going to Mars and living comfortably. The technology required to achieve that will service the agri-food industry sector here in Canada, especially Canada, because we are a harsh environment. The next worst place after a snowbank in Yellowknife is the moon. And the solution is exactly the same, except you tighten, the box is a little tighter sealed on the moon. Nevertheless, those technologies and the evolution of that becomes the economic engine for a sophisticated society like ours. Otherwise, the next best economic engine is going to war, as our ex-friends to the south have discovered. They have to be pissed off at somebody or they don't have an economy. We have the luxury of not doing that. We have the luxury of deciding to go to Mars and make that, even if we never get there, it doesn't matter. We will still have an economic engine that survives around a very sophisticated tech transfer from the challenge of going to space and the tech transfer to the agri-food industry sectors that we serve. Thank you for that.
Thanks for talk. You sort of hinted at it, but I'm wondering, there's terrible food insecurity in the north around fresh fruit and vegetables. Can you discuss a little bit how you could scale the fabulous technology you guys have to help people eat properly up north?
Yeah, that has been a rationale, a line rationale in virtually every research project I've submitted for the last 40 years, that the technologies that we're developing, the controlled environment agriculture stuff that is what we do, has applications in the north. And it's even more so now, especially with defense issues. But the reality is, Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut has the total population of about 140, 150,000 people. There's roughly 40 or 50,000 people in each of those territories. Not a lot of voters. So the industry, the government is keen, and they, the industry partners that engage all have a great idea. But as soon as the government money runs out, the whole thing falls apart. I've been in so many projects. We worked in the Northwest Territories. We had partnership there with the Aurora Research Institute. We had a project called Ag North. And if you get on the Aurora Research Institute website, you'll see our final report where we set up a pilot at Hay River at the Northern Farm Training Institute. We had a greenhouse, a vertical farm system with some of those stacked up layers. And the federal government even put a whole bunch of money into it. And the past 2 prime ministers ago announced this brave new world of agriculture in the north and food security aspect. It didn't happen because by the time you have to have the First Nations, the community, the territory, and the federal government. All 4 groups have to nod vigorously at the same time on the same idea. Never happens. It's a tragic statement on the politics of doing stuff in the north. It's a huge challenge. Notwithstanding that, you mentioned scale. That is exactly the issue. Every one of the Inuit leaders that I met with all had the vision of having their own container in their little 280-person community stuck in a snowbank out in the middle of nowhere. Can't do that. The economies of scale need to be addressed. You have to have hundreds of these set up in a distribution place. The distribution system in the north is very effective. After you spend about $130 million of our taxpayers' money from the south here to subsidize the air freight of tomatoes from Mexico, if you're going to try and grow tomatoes in a snowbank in the north with diesel energy, forget it. It's 40 or 50 cents a kilowatt hour. We complain about our 10.3 or whatever the heck it is down here, but energy is the main issue. So we're involved now with the McMaster Group, actually. SMRs, small, medium reactors. Give me nuclear, and we'll solve all of this. I got to have it on the moon. I got to have it on Mars. So
There's a question here in the middle.
Good morning. I'm interested in the transfer of technology. About 2 weeks ago, I believe I saw a brief article on television showing a robot picking tomatoes in your greenhouse. You talked about lettuce and not being a very good crop, but are you seeing more crops being developed that can use both vertical farming and also robotics?
Yeah, the candidate crop list for vertical farming has to expand in scope, or it will never address anything even remotely similar to food security anywhere. And the mechanical systems, robots, they're at a relatively juvenile stage now. They can pick strawberries, they can pick tomatoes, and they have imaging systems that tell you whether it's ripe or not and ready to pick. But just think about it, the cost of that infrastructure is still a little bit prohibitive. The cost benefit doesn't yield a profit with that kind of an approach. So we're in transition phase here, and things, if you see some industry come out with really realistic and robust technology for automated harvesting and things like that, invest in them, because that is ultimately the future.
Got a question here on your right.
Sorry.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very informative. And as a former retired teacher, I'd like to thank you for Tomatosphere. We used it for years in my classroom, and we really enjoyed it. My question is, what are your top 5 bang for your buck plants that you're researching now for space?
In these early stages, the feasibility study we did in Northwest Territories, must be 8 or 10 years ago now, focused on exactly the high leverage, like strawberries and, believe it or not, romaine lettuce, okay? They really like Caesar salad in the north, and I had to have romaine lettuce on my list or they didn't want to play. But there were 6 or 7, and I can never, cherry tomatoes, the technical confines of a vertical farm system are you want to have them as small as possible, so dwarf varieties, same in space. You want to minimize the volume consumption of your food production system. So we're looking at cherry tomatoes and strawberries and a few other dwarf varieties of, and I can't remember them now. You'll have to get on the website and check out the Ag North final product. But it shocked me to figure out that it is economically feasible. I did not think that was going to be the case. If you choose the commodities appropriately and have a good distribution system set up, which there already is, they've already got, I flew on that DC-3 that was on TV all the time. That distribution system exists. You just want to take a bit of the subsidy from shipping stuff from Mexico. 85% of the fresh produce comes from Mexico. And insert that into subsidizing the energy cost of growing the food. But there are some commodities, and it shocked me that we learned that if you choose the commodities appropriately and have a big enough scale and a distribution system established, you can actually make a buck. At the time we were doing this, strawberries cost $25 a kilo. And that's a lot. Actually, I was at Costco not too long ago. It's not far from that now. Yeah. Anyway.
There's a question here at the back.
Okay.
Are your products organic?
Well,
Not an issue at all.
The question I used to get was, are they genetically modified? And I used to say that if you're really sensitive to that sort of thing, then stay home, because we're going to have to modify these plants to be adaptable to the kinds of harsh environments, low oxygen potentially, low pressure, high CO2, restrictions in nitrate recycling, et cetera. So we're going to have to, they now call it genetically edit the plants. But yeah, they will be different, but not that much different than what you conventionally grow in your garden for a standardized recipe.
There's a question here in the front. Over here in the front.
Okay, but organic, I don't know. There's not going to be any pesticides. We can't use toxic chemistry to control any critters that come up in space, because toxic chemistry will accumulate and eventually get us. So yeah, I guess it will be organic.
I'm curious about the mix of plants, legumes, whatever else you were focusing on for the balanced vegetarian diet in space. You talked about commercial growing for here on Earth, but what are the key things from the mixture of 7 or 8 whatever plants you think are the ones that provide the biggest bang for the buck, not the buck,
sure,
but the environment, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't get exactly the first end of that. What was the what?
So the question is, what are the plants? So you said you're focusing on researchers on what is the
right.
plants that you can grow in space that'll provide a balanced diet, and what are those?
Well, simple. Barley.
Not just Scotch.
My point is, it doesn't really matter. Here we are at the very early stages. We're just about to get back to the moon in a couple of years. And it doesn't really matter what, I'll even allow lettuce if you must. But it'll probably be Arabidopsis, the guinea pig of the plant science world, will be among the first plants that you send up there. Can't eat them. But it doesn't matter. I need any plant, any organic system, because the challenge is going to be to develop the technology to sustain a lunar night. 14 days of minus 200 outdoors. The Chinese sent a plant growing mission to the backside of the moon in December 2019, and all of their plants froze to death almost instantly, except the cotton plant, which actually did germinate and grow a little bit, but you can't eat cotton. And so it was and then as soon as the night descended on them, everything froze solid, and that was the end of it. Not much of an experiment. So we've been working with the Canadian Space Agency and a company called Canadensis Aerospace here in Ontario for the last 4 or 5 years now. And incrementally, we've taken projects and proposals out of the CSA and incrementally advanced the technology. We now have the technology here in Canada to survive a lunar night. So it doesn't matter what plant it is. I just insist that it's going to be barley. And we'll get the barley seeds up there. We'll grow them. Okay, we won't get any samples back, but we'll get the story. And that's all the Glenlivet boys are interested in.
Any other questions on this side?
There's one here.
There's a diet. We published this in, I'm going to say, 05, 06, 07, whatever. Jeff Waters and I, working with a nutrition group at Cornell University, and that's where we came up with the 72.3 or 73.2 square meters of production area requirement. That was based on data from field-grown corn and wheat and durum wheat, and we grew bread wheat in our chamber and achieved 5 times the productivity of a field in Saskatchewan. So just think of the crops that you would need for a conventional, nutritional, well-balanced, psychologically appealing vegetarian diet. And those are exactly them. So corn and bean and peas. And just think of dwarf varieties of all of these. We're not going to grow 10-foot corn plants. We're going to grow dwarf varieties of corn and dwarf varieties of wheat. Wheat ends up, for the North American diet, wheat ends up being a pretty significant proportion of the area that you grow. If it's a more Asian diet, then it's rice. So there are lots of variations on the theme here that dictate the candidate crops. And also, I was having coffee with a friend of mine at the university some years ago, He was in the apiculture program. So he said, okay, Mikey, you're on Mars and you've got your acres of tomatoes under a low pressure environment, an inflatable low mass system. How are you going to pollinate them? So he lent me a beehive. He called it a trained beehive. It was trained because they had this platform they put on the floor of the chamber, and it had brightly colored flowers in it. And in the middle of each flower was this little nectar pot, and the bee knew to go there and do his business, pollinate, get nectar, and come back to the hive. And then we started messing with the atmosphere, pull the pressure down, 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 down. Got down to 1/3 of Earth's atmosphere. Remember, plants can handle 1/10. We get down to 1/3 of Earth's atmosphere, and that's 1/3 of everything. So 1/3 of our oxygen here is down to about 7. That's the threshold for plants. Bees didn't like that. In fact, we thought we were killing them because they were just sort of listless and they were sort of lying around on the front door of the beehive. So we hurriedly brought the oxygen partial pressure up, but left the total pressure down. Got the oxygen partial pressure up to about 2/3 of Earth, roughly 14, 15 kilopascals partial pressure of oxygen. The bees woke up, thankfully. It would have been a hard explanation. They woke up, however, they couldn't fly. The physics of flight was defeated by the density of the atmosphere at 1/3 pressure. So, happily, they walked to work. Quite incredible. And we have video. You know, I had a grad student sitting there watching them on a high-speed camera, and sure enough, they walked to work. We sent that. That was a neat little, one-page kind of article for Nature or Science, and we sent it off to them, and they loved it. However, they wanted us to continue and add more oxygen thresholds and do more experiments, and we didn't have the money, so we published it in a less prestigious journal.
Hi, I just wonder if you could talk about in the north. I know there's 6 months where I'm over here on your right. I know they don't have sun during the winter, but they have wind. Can you not use wind and solar and storage batteries?
The batteries, that's the key. I don't own an electric car because I don't trust the battery system yet. I don't trust the recycling of it. We're just creating another environmental scourge. So the battery issue is one of the things that holds us back there. Yes, there's lots of wind. We worked with the Arctic Energy Alliance when we did the Ag North project, and they're based in Yellowknife. And the key there is you got to mix and match all of the alternative energy options: solar, wind, geothermal, and storage becomes the big holdup. And then, of course, you need a diesel generator as a backup because inevitably it's going to break. Something's going to break, and your whole system's going to freeze. And so it's still an economic nightmare to try and. There's no simple solution, and there's no free lunch. That's why I'm putting so much creative energy now in supporting the small modular reactor solution to energy in the north. That energy is the main holdup. That's what stops everything. As soon as the government money runs out, every project I've ever been involved with just falls apart. And so we need to restructure our subsidy of life support in the north and then just stop spending hundreds of millions of dollars air freighting tomatoes from Mexico. Oh, I have a question. Surely in a group this large, it's somebody's birthday today? There's a birthday. I have a present for you. Can you ship this up to the birthday girl?
I'm sorry. Oh. Okay.
Over here.
Ask for a driver's license.
Ellie, I've got a question over here.
Okay.
Nobody else?
One more.
Another birthday over here? Oh, question. Okay.
Thank you very much for all your information. It was very interesting and humorous. My question, though, is a little more dire. You talk about the small nuclear reactor in space. What about the dangers of waste?
I can't answer that because I'm not a nuclear scientist. I understand that the risks with SMRs is significantly less than with conventional nuclear. I'm expecting my colleagues who are smarter than I am on this area to resolve those issues. It is not something that isn't taken very seriously. You can believe me. So the reality is that long-term exploration, especially Mars, is going to require some kind of reliable, sustainable energy source. Because, there's lots of water there, happily. The incremental advancement of the biological life support system will absolutely require some form of reliable energy. And at the moment, as far as our technology is concerned today, it may be different. Things are going pretty fast, and maybe some artificial intelligence system will come up with a better solution. But until then, we'll keep plodding along at the incremental advancements we have.
Okay, thank you.
No more birthdays? Don't be shy. We'll have a party.
All right.
Thanks.
I do have a question for you, though, myself. You said that when you were young, starting off on all of this, there were two things you were going to look at, barley and roses. Is that just a joke for the audience that you were thinking of roses? Then why?
We had a variety of rose all selected with the Ontario Rose Growers. It was a white rose variety called Lunatic. I mean, it writes itself. I didn't have to do anything. But Frank Salisbury, the old bugger, he just wouldn't have anything. And I understood, the mass and energy cost of growing a plant that you can't eat, can't go there.
Yeah. Okay, so it wasn't just a joke.
No,
All right.
Totally serious.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much,
My
Michael,
pleasure.
for the talk. I think it's one of the topics that we never know what we're going to get out of it, and we're always going to learn something new and different from it.
There's a quiz.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone for coming today to hear this. I think it was informative for all of us, and we look forward to having you all back next week. Next week we have Dr. Dawn Bowdish back. I think if some of you remember, she spoke to us a couple of years ago, and she's going to come and speak to us about gut health next week. So I think that should be another interesting topic. So look forward to seeing you all then.